Jake Martinez walked down the long metal hallway of Kepler Station. His boots made soft sounds on the floor. The walls around him were covered with strange symbols and lights that he did not understand. Other students moved past him, but they were not like any people he had ever seen. Some students had blue skin that looked like crystal. Others floated in the air like clouds of gas. A few had tentacles instead of arms. They all stared at Jake as he walked by. Their eyes showed confusion and dislike. Jake tried not to look nervous. He was the first human to ever get into the Galactic Defense Academy. Back on Earth, everyone said he was lucky. Some said he was crazy for coming here. His family worried that the other students would not accept him. The Academy was the best military school in the galaxy. Only the smartest beings from each planet could attend. The teachers were famous across all the star systems. Students who graduated became generals and admirals in the Galactic Defense Force. Jake found his classroom and stopped at the door. Through the window, he could see other students already sitting inside. They were talking in languages that sounded like music or wind or breaking glass. When Jake opened the door, all talking stopped. Commander HFY stood at the front of the room. She was tall and thin with purple skin and 4 arms. Her eyes were bright yellow and very large. She had been teaching at the academy for over 200 years. Everyone respected her, but they also feared her. "Students," she said in a voice that sounded like singing, "we have a new member joining our class today." Jake walked to an empty seat. The chair was made for beings much larger than humans, so his feet did not touch the floor. The student next to him moved away. This student looked like a tree made of silver metal. Green lights blinked along his branches. "This is Jake Martinez from the planet Earth," Commander HFY continued. "Humans are a new species in our galaxy. They have only recently developed space travel." A student that looked like a giant insect raised one of her 6 arms. "Commander, how can a primitive species attend this academy? Humans have not even mastered quantum physics yet." Other students made sounds that Jake guessed were laughter. Some clicked their teeth. Others buzzed like bees. A few made musical notes. "The Galactic Council has decided that all species deserve representation," the commander said. "We will treat our new student with respect." But Jake could tell that many students did not agree. They whispered to each other in their strange languages. Some pointed at him when they thought he was not looking. Commander HFY began the lesson. She talked about something called dimensional warfare. Jake had never heard of this before. The other students took notes on devices that floated in the air. Jake used an old paper notebook and a pen. "In dimensional warfare," the commander explained, "battles happen across multiple realities at the same time. A good general must think in at least 7 dimensions." Jake tried to understand, but it was very difficult. On Earth, wars happened in 3 dimensions. Sometimes planes fought in the sky and submarines fought underwater, but that was still just 3 dimensions. 7 dimensions seemed impossible. A student who looked like a ball of light spoke up. "Commander, this is basic knowledge. Even children on my planet understand dimensional theory." More laughter filled the room. Jake felt his face get hot. He wished he could disappear. After class, Jake gathered his things slowly. He hoped the other students would leave first. But 3 of them waited for him by the door. The first was Veltar, one of the crystal beings. His body was blue and clear like ice. When he spoke, his voice sounded like breaking glass. "Human," Veltar said, "you do not belong here. This academy is for intelligent species only." The second student was Huthin, a gas creature who floated in a clear container. His voice came from speakers on the container. "My people have been studying warfare for 10,000 years. Your species still fights with metal bullets." The third student looked like a large cat with purple fur and 6 legs. "Perhaps you should return to your little planet before you embarrass yourself further." Jake took a deep breath. His father had told him this would happen. "I know I have a lot to learn," he said. "But the Galactic Council accepted me for a reason. Maybe I can bring a different way of thinking to the class." Veltar made a sound like glass breaking. "Different? You mean primitive?" There's only one way to understand advanced warfare, and your simple human brain cannot grasp it. The three students left Jake standing alone in the classroom. He sat back down and put his head in his hands. Maybe they were right. Maybe he did not belong here. Commander Zwaxthra was still at her desk, organizing her papers. She looked up at Jake with her large yellow eyes. "Difficult first day?" she asked. Jake nodded. "They think I'm too stupid to be here." "Intelligence comes in many forms," the commander said. "I have taught thousands of students from dozens of species. Each species thinks differently. What seems obvious to one may be impossible for another." "But I really don't understand dimensional warfare," Jake admitted. "Understanding will come with time. What I find interesting is that humans were accepted into this academy at all. The Galactic Council does not make decisions lightly. They must see something special in your species." Jake looked out the window at the stars. Earth was somewhere out there, very far away. What if they made a mistake? Commander Zwaxthra collected her papers and stood up. Her forearms moved in a pattern that seemed like a dance. "In my experience, Jake Martinez, mistakes are rare in the galaxy. But surprises happen every day." She walked toward the door, then stopped. "Tomorrow we begin studying the great military simulations. These tests have challenged the best minds in the galaxy for decades. Perhaps your human perspective will prove useful." After she left, Jake sat alone in the empty classroom. Through the window, he could see spaceships moving between the stars. Each ship carried beings from different worlds, different ways of thinking. Maybe Commander Zwaxthra was right. Maybe being different was not the same as being wrong. Maybe humans could add something new to the galaxy's understanding of warfare. Jake picked up his simple paper notebook and pen. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. He would have to prove that humans belonged among the stars. 3 weeks had passed since Jake started at the academy. Every day brought new lessons that made his head hurt. He learned about weapons that could destroy entire star systems. He studied battles that happened in places where time moved backward. He read about generals who commanded armies across 100 different planets at once. The other students still treated him like he did not belong. They worked together on projects but never asked Jake to join them. During meals, they sat at tables far away from him. When teachers asked questions, some students would laugh if Jake gave a wrong answer. But Jake kept trying. He stayed up late every night reading books about galactic warfare. He practiced using the floating computer devices until his eyes hurt. Slowly, he began to understand some of the ideas that seemed impossible before. On a cold morning, Commander Zwaxthra entered the classroom carrying a large metal box. Her forearms moved carefully as she set it down on her desk. The box hummed with energy and glowed with soft blue light. "Students," she announced, "today marks an important moment in your education. Today you will face the Gordian maze." Every student in the room became very quiet. Even Veltar, who always seemed confident, looked nervous. The gas student Huthin's container began to glow brighter, which Jake had learned meant he was excited or scared. Jake raised his hand. "What is the Gordian maze?" Several students made their laughing sounds. Commander Zwaxthra held up one of her hands for silence. "The Gordian maze is the most difficult test in all of galactic military education," she explained. "It is a war simulation that has been used at this academy for over 200 years. The greatest minds in the galaxy have struggled with this test." She opened the metal box. Inside was a device that looked like a small crystal ball surrounded by rings of metal. Lights danced inside the crystal like tiny stars. "This simulation presents you with an impossible military situation," the commander continued. 3 major galactic powers are at war. Each side has different strengths and weaknesses. There are 17 different factors you must consider. Time distortion fields, quantum weapons, political alliances that change every few hours, resource shortages, civilian populations that must be protected. Jake felt his stomach drop. This sounded much harder than anything they had studied in class. "The goal is simple," Commander Zwaxthra said. "Find a way to end the conflict with the least loss of life and resources. Find a strategy that brings peace to the galaxy." Veltar raised one of his crystal arms. Commander, what is the current record for solving this simulation? The fastest solution ever found took 6 hours and 23 minutes, she replied. That record was set 50 years ago by General Crixton, who went on to become Supreme Commander of the Galactic Fleet. A student who looked like a walking plan asked, "How long do we have to complete the test?" "You have 1 full week. This is your final examination for this course. Your solution will determine your final grade and your placement in the Galactic Defense Force." Commander ZYX began connecting the device to the room's main computer system. Some students have needed the entire week to find any solution at all. Others have failed completely. This test will show us who truly understands the art of galactic warfare. Jake looked around the room. His classmates were all studying their floating computers, probably reviewing everything they had learned. Their faces showed determination and worry. "Let me explain the scenario in detail," the commander said. "The Zephyrian Empire controls the northern spiral arm of the galaxy. They have the strongest military, but their resources are running low. The crystalline hegemony holds the central systems. They have advanced technology, but fewer ships. The Void Collective controls the outer rim. They are mysterious and use weapons we do not fully understand." She touched the crystal device and images appeared in the air above it. Jake could see star maps showing the 3 territories. Red lines showed where battles were happening. Yellow dots marked important planets. Each faction believes the others are planning to destroy them, Commander ZYX continued. They are all preparing for a final, total war. Billions of lives hang in the balance. Traditional peace talks have failed. Military pressure has only made things worse. The images changed to show massive space fleets moving toward battle. Jake could see thousands of ships on each side. The weapons they carried could probably destroy entire solar systems. Your job is to find a solution that these civilizations cannot see. You must think beyond normal military strategy. You must find the path that ends this conflict forever. Commander ZYX looked at each student carefully. This test has broken the confidence of some of our brightest minds. It has caused students to question everything they thought they knew about warfare. It is designed to push you beyond your limits. She paused at Jake's desk. Some of you may find that your traditional ways of thinking are not enough. You may need to approach this problem from directions you have never considered before. Jake felt like she was speaking directly to him. Maybe his different human perspective could actually help with this test. "You may work alone or in small groups," the commander said. "You may use any resources in the Academy library. You may consult with other teachers. But remember, this is ultimately a test of your individual understanding." She activated the simulation device. The Gordian maze is now active. You may begin whenever you are ready. Good luck to all of you. Most students immediately connected their floating computers to the simulation. They began pulling up charts and graphs and mathematical equations. The room filled with the sounds of rapid calculation and analysis. Jake stared at the crystal device. Inside, he could see tiny representations of the 3 fleets moving toward each other. Real beings were inside those ships. Real families lived on the planets that would be destroyed if the war continued. He thought about all the wars in human history. Most of them had seemed impossible to solve at the time. But somehow, solutions had been found. Usually, the solutions came from people who thought differently than everyone else. Jake took out his simple paper notebook and began to write down his first thoughts. While his classmates worked with advanced computers, he used his old pen to draw simple pictures of the 3 factions. Maybe being primitive would actually help him see something that everyone else was missing. Jake sat quietly while chaos filled the classroom around him. His classmates had been working on the Gordian maze for 3 hours. Veltar had 12 different holographic displays floating around his crystal body, each one showing complex mathematical formulas. Huthin had connected his gas container to the Academy's main computer and was processing millions of calculations per second. Other students worked in small groups. The plant-like beings whispered to each other in a language that sounded like wind through leaves. The insect students clicked their mandibles rapidly as they shared data through chemical signals that Jake could smell but not understand. Everyone was treating this like the most complicated puzzle in the galaxy. They analyzed supply lines and weapon capabilities. They calculated travel times between star systems. They studied the political histories of all three factions going back thousands of years. Jake looked down at his simple paper notebook. He had drawn 3 circles to represent the 3 factions. Under each circle, he had written a few basic facts. The Zephyrian Empire was running out of resources. The crystalline hegemony had good technology, but not many ships. The Void Collective was mysterious and used strange weapons. While his classmates worked with advanced computers, Jake just sat and thought. He remembered something his grandfather had told him years ago. His grandfather had been a soldier in one of Earth's wars. Sometimes, Jake, his grandfather had said, the biggest problems have the simplest solutions. But people make them complicated because they think complicated problems need complicated answers. Jake looked at the crystal device again. Inside, he could see the 3 fleets still moving toward each other. But now he noticed something that nobody else seemed to be paying attention to. He studied the background information about each faction. The Zephyrian Empire had started this conflict because they needed more resources to feed their people. The crystalline hegemony had joined the fight because they were afraid the other 2 factions would attack them. The Void Collective was fighting because they thought the others wanted to steal their territory. Jake read more carefully. The Zephyrian Empire's resource shortage had started when their main agricultural planets were hit by natural disasters. Solar flares had destroyed their crops. They were not greedy for conquest. They were hungry. The crystalline hegemony had received intelligence reports saying the other factions were planning to attack them. But Jake noticed that these reports all came from the same source, a group called the Military Intelligence Division that seemed to benefit from continued conflict. The Void Collective's territory included planets that were supposed to be empty. But Jake found a small note in the historical records that mentioned refugee settlements in that area. Jake put down his pen and stared at his notebook. 3 factions preparing for war. But what if they were not really enemies at all? He raised his hand. Commander ZYX was helping another student, but she saw Jake and walked over to his desk. Do you have a question about the simulation? She asked. Can I access the original historical records about how this conflict started? Jake asked. Commander ZYX yellow eyes showed surprise. Most students focus on the current military situation. Historical research is allowed, but it rarely helps with finding a solution. I would like to try a different approach, Jake said. She activated a small computer terminal at his desk. You can access any records in the Galactic Archives. But remember, you only have 1 week to complete this test. Jake began reading through historical documents. Most of his classmates were still working on military calculations. Veltar had now surrounded himself with 20 different holographic displays. Other students were building complex computer models of battle scenarios. Jake ignored all of that. He focused on the simple question, why had this war really started? The more he read, the clearer the picture became. The Zephyrian Empire's food shortage had begun when solar flares destroyed their agricultural worlds. But those solar flares were not natural disasters. They were caused by experiments with quantum weapons conducted by an unknown group. The crystalline hegemony's intelligence reports about enemy attacks were all fake. They had been created by weapons manufacturers who wanted to sell more military equipment. The Void Collective's territory was not empty space. It was home to millions of refugees from a 4th faction that had been destroyed in an earlier war. The Void Collective was not trying to conquer anyone, they were trying to protect homeless people. Jake sat back in his chair. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but not in the way anyone expected. He looked at the simulation again. 3 mighty fleets were racing toward the biggest battle in galactic history. Billions of people would die. Entire star systems would be destroyed. And it was all based on lies and misunderstandings. Jake picked up his pen and wrote a single sentence in his notebook. What if the war does not need to happen at all? Around him, his classmates continued their complex calculations. They were trying to figure out how to win a war. But Jake was starting to think that the real solution was to prevent the war completely. He looked at the clock on the wall. 37 seconds had passed since he wrote that sentence in his notebook. Jake stood up and walked to Commander ZYX desk. She was reviewing another student's work, a massive computer simulation that predicted battle outcomes across 17 different scenarios. "Commander," Jake said quietly, "I think I have found the solution." Commander HFY looked up with surprise. Around the room, other students stopped their work and stared at Jake. Veltar's crystal body began to glow brighter, which Jake had learned meant he was angry. "Jake," the commander said carefully, "you have been working for less than 4 hours. Students have needed days or weeks to solve this simulation." "I know it seems impossible," Jake said, "but I think the test has been asking the wrong question." The classroom became completely silent. Even the humming of computers seemed to get quieter. Jake took a deep breath. Everyone is trying to figure out how to win this war. But what if the goal should be to stop the war from happening in the first place? Veltar made his glass-breaking laugh sound. "Ridiculous. The simulation clearly states that war is inevitable. All 3 factions are committed to fighting." Jake shook his head. "That is what they believe. But beliefs can be changed if you show people the truth." Commander HFY's 4 arms moved in the pattern that Jake had learned meant she was very interested in something. "Explain your solution," she said. Jake walked to the front of the classroom. His hands were shaking, but he tried to keep his voice steady. Every student was staring at him. Some looked curious. Others looked angry that a human thought he could solve something they could not. "The Gordian maze asks us to find a way to end the war," Jake began. "Everyone assumes that means we need to help one side win, or find a way to make the fighting stop after it starts. But what if we could prevent the fighting from ever beginning?" Commander HFY activated the main display screen. The simulation appeared large enough for everyone to see. 3 massive fleets were moving toward each other through space. "These 3 factions think they are enemies," Jake continued. "But I do not think they really are." Veltar interrupted with his glass-breaking voice. "The simulation clearly states their motivations. The Zephyrian Empire wants to expand their territory. The crystalline hegemony wants to protect their technology. The Void Collective wants to destroy both civilizations." Jake shook his head. "That is what the simulation says on the surface. But I read deeper into the historical records." He pointed to the Zephyrian Empire's fleet on the display. "The Zephyrians are not fighting for conquest. They are fighting because their people are starving. Solar flares destroyed their agricultural worlds 3 years ago." "Solar flares are natural disasters," said Huthin from his floating container. "They cannot be prevented or controlled." "These were not natural," Jake replied. "The solar flares were caused by quantum weapon experiments. The experiments were conducted by a group called the Omega Research Division. But here is the important part. Omega Research Division is not part of any of the 3 factions." Jake touched the control panel and brought up historical documents on the screen. Omega Research Division is a private military contractor. They sell weapons to all 3 factions. They benefit when there are more wars in the galaxy. Commander HFY's yellow eyes grew larger. Her 4 arms moved in patterns that Jake had never seen before. Jake continued his explanation. "The crystalline hegemony joined this conflict because their intelligence services told them the other factions were planning to attack them. But look at where those intelligence reports came from." He showed more documents on the screen. Every single report came from the same source, a company called Strategic Information Systems. That company is owned by Omega Research Division. The classroom was completely silent now. Even the humming of computers had stopped. "The Void Collective is not trying to conquer anyone," Jake said. "Their territory includes planets that are supposed to be empty. But they are not empty. They are home to 12 million refugees from the Altair Wars. The Void Collective has been hiding these refugees and protecting them." Jake turned to face his classmates. 3 civilizations are about to destroy each other based on lies. The Zephyrians think they need to fight for resources. The Crystallines think they need to fight for survival. The Void Collective thinks they need to fight to protect refugees. But none of them actually want this war. A student who looked like a large bird raised one wing. "Even if your analysis is correct, how does this help? The fleets are already moving toward battle. The commanders have their orders." Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. "That is the beautiful part. If we can show each faction the truth, they will want to stop fighting immediately. He began typing commands into the simulation control panel. The Zephyrian Empire needs food for their people. The crystalline hegemony has the most advanced agricultural technology in the galaxy. They could help restore the Zephyrian agricultural worlds. But why would they help their enemies? Asked the plant-like student. Because the crystallines are not really their enemies, Jake replied. The crystallines have been afraid of invasion, but the Zephyrians are not invaders. They are refugees looking for help. Jake brought up more data on the screen. The Void Collective has been protecting refugees from the Altair Wars. But those refugees need permanent homes and resources. The Zephyrian Empire has empty planets that could house millions of people. He looked around the room. His classmates were starting to understand. The crystalline hegemony has advanced technology, but not enough people to use it effectively. The refugees that the Void Collective has been protecting include some of the most skilled engineers and scientists in the galaxy. Jake made a few more changes to the simulation. On the screen, the three fleets began to slow down. Instead of fighting each other, these three factions could help each other, he said. The Zephyrians get food and agricultural technology from the crystallines. The crystallines get skilled workers and engineers from the refugees. The Void Collective gets permanent homes for the people they have been protecting. Commander Ziwaxthra was staring at the screen with all four of her eyes. But the military contractors who caused this conflict will lose their profits when there is no war to fight, Jake finished. Omega Research Division and Strategic Information Systems will be exposed as the real enemies of peace. Jake entered his final commands into the simulation. On the screen, the three fleets changed course. Instead of moving toward battle, they began moving toward a neutral meeting point. My solution is simple, Jake said. Send the truth to all three faction leaders at the same time. Show them the evidence about Omega Research Division. Explain how they have all been manipulated. Propose the cooperative solution instead of war. The simulation ran Jake's solution. Numbers began appearing on the screen. Expected casualties, 0. Resources saved, trillions of galactic credits. Time to implementation, 72 hours. At the bottom of the screen, a message appeared in bright green letters. Optimal solution achieved. Commander Ziwaxthra stared at the message for a long time. Then she looked at Jake with an expression he could not read. Jake Martinez, she said slowly, you have just accomplished something that no student in the history of this academy has ever done before. What is that? Jake asked. You found the hidden peaceful resolution that was built into the simulation 200 years ago. You are the first student to ever discover that the Gordian Maze was not really about winning a war. It was about preventing war entirely. The classroom erupted in sounds from a dozen different species. Some students made shocked gasps. Others clicked or buzzed or hummed in amazement. Jake looked at the timer on the screen. Total time to solution, 37 seconds of actual problem solving, plus 3 hours and 23 minutes of research. He had broken a record that had stood for 2 centuries. Word about Jake's solution spread through Kepler Station faster than light travel. Within hours, teachers from every department were coming to see the human who had solved the impossible test. Students from other classes crowded around the doorway trying to get a look at the simulation results. Commander Ziwaxthra had called an emergency meeting of the Academy's faculty. Jake sat alone in the classroom, staring at the screen that still showed his solution. He could hardly believe what had happened. 3 hours ago, his classmates had been laughing at him. Now they were all silent, looking at him with expressions he had never seen before. Veltar approached Jake's desk slowly. The crystal being's blue body was dim, which Jake had learned meant he was confused or upset. Human, Veltar said quietly, I owe you an apology. Jake looked up in surprise. Veltar had never spoken to him politely before. I believed that intelligence could only exist in one form, Veltar continued. My people have always solved problems through mathematical analysis and logical computation. I thought that was the only way to be smart. Jake did not know what to say. He had never expected an apology from any of his classmates. Your solution was so simple that I could not see it, Veltar admitted. While I was calculating weapon trajectories and supply line efficiency, You were asking why the weapons needed to be fired at all. Other students began gathering around Jake's desk. Huthan floated closer in his gas container. I have been analyzing your approach, Huthan said through his speakers. My species processes information at incredible speeds. We can perform billions of calculations in seconds. But you found the answer by thinking slowly and carefully about the right questions. The plant-like student named Grovelin rustled her leaves nervously. In our culture, we solve problems by growing new connections between ideas over long periods of time. Your solution grew instantly, like a seed that became a tree in moments. Jake felt overwhelmed by the attention. I just tried to think about what was really happening instead of what the simulation told me was happening. That is exactly the point, said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Professor Krelon entering the classroom. He was a tall being with silver skin and no visible eyes. He was the head of the mathematics department and one of the most respected teachers at the academy. Jake Martinez, Professor Krelon said, I have been analyzing your solution for the past 2 hours. I have run it through every verification system we have. Every test confirms the same result. He activated a new display screen. Your solution does not just solve the Gordian maze. It solves it perfectly. 0 casualties, maximum resource efficiency, permanent peace between all factions, and complete elimination of the source of conflict. Professor Krelon paused. In 200 years of testing, no student has ever achieved a perfect solution. Jake felt his heart beating fast. Does this mean I passed the test? Passed. Professor Krelon made a sound that might have been laughter. Jake Martinez, you have redefined what it means to pass this test. Commander Zwaxthra returned to the classroom with several other faculty members. Jake recognized Dr. Healerton from the psychology department and Captain Stormwing from military history. Jake, Commander Zwaxthra said, we need to understand how you approach this problem. Your method could change how we teach military strategy throughout the galaxy. Dr. Healerton stepped forward. She looked like a combination of a jellyfish and a butterfly, with transparent wings and a body that glowed softly. I specialize in studying how different species think and solve problems, she explained. Would you be willing to let me analyze your thought processes? Jake nodded. I want to understand it too. I am not sure why my approach worked when everyone else's did not. Dr. Healerton activated a device that scanned Jake's brain patterns. Interesting, she said after a few moments. Your neural activity shows patterns I have never seen before. She displayed the brain scan results on the main screen. Most species in our galaxy evolved to handle complex problems by breaking them down into smaller, manageable pieces. They build detailed models and analyze multiple variables simultaneously. The brain scan showed areas of Jake's mind lighting up in different colors. Human brains work differently. When faced with complex problems, you simplify them. You look for underlying patterns instead of surface details. Captain Stormwing, a bird-like being with bright red feathers, spoke up. This matches historical records of human military tactics. Humans have won battles throughout their history by using unconventional strategies. He activated another display showing battles from Earth's history. At the Battle of Thermopylae, 300 humans held off an army of hundreds of thousands by choosing the right location. At the Battle of Agincourt, humans defeated a much larger force by using simple wooden weapons in a clever way. Humans are persistence hunters, Dr. Healerton added. Your species evolved to solve problems by never giving up and always looking for new approaches. Other species evolved to solve problems by being stronger, faster, or smarter. Humans evolved to solve problems by being more creative. Professor Krelon brought up more data. I have been comparing Jake's solution to historical military strategies from across the galaxy. No other species has ever approached warfare from this angle. What angle? Jake asked. Prevention instead of victory, Professor Krelon replied. Every other species focuses on how to win conflicts. Humans focus on how to avoid conflicts entirely. Commander Zwaxthra's 4 arms moved in patterns that showed deep thought. This has implications beyond just one test. If human thinking is fundamentally different from other galactic species, then humans could offer solutions to problems that have puzzled us for centuries. Dr. Healer-Tun looked at her scan results again. Jake, when you were solving this problem, what were you thinking about? Jake tried to remember. I was thinking about something my grandfather told me. He said that big problems sometimes have simple solutions, but people make them complicated because they think complicated problems need complicated answers. Your grandfather was a military strategist? Captain Stormwing asked. No, Jake replied. He was a farmer. But he fought in one of Earth's wars when he was young. Dr. Healer-Tun made notes on her floating computer. A farmer who became a soldier. Someone who learned that the best way to solve problems was to understand what was really needed, not what people said they wanted. Commander Zwaxthra looked at the screen showing Jake's perfect solution. Jake Martinez, I am recommending you for immediate advancement to the graduate program. But first, I want you to help us understand how to teach other students to think the way you do. Jake felt dizzy. A few hours ago, he had been the worst student in the class. Now the faculty wanted him to help them teach others. I do not think I can teach people to be human, he said. No, Commander Zwaxthra replied. But perhaps you can teach them to ask human questions. News of Jake's achievement reached the Galactic Council within days. Representatives from dozens of worlds sent messages asking for more information about the human who had solved the impossible test. Some messages showed curiosity. Others showed concern. A few showed fear. Dr. Lisa Park arrived at Kepler Station 3 days after Jake's test. She was a human xenopsychologist who worked as a cultural liaison between Earth and the galactic community. Jake had never met another human since arriving at the academy, so he was excited to see someone from his own species. Dr. Park was a tall woman with brown hair and kind eyes. She wore the simple blue uniform of the Galactic Cultural Exchange Program instead of the military uniforms that everyone else at the academy wore. Jake Martinez, she said when they met in Commander Zwaxthra's office, you have caused quite a stir in the galactic community. I was just trying to pass my test, Jake replied. Dr. Park smiled. You did much more than that. Your solution to the Gordian maze has forced every military strategist in the galaxy to reconsider their basic assumptions about warfare. Commander Zwaxthra was also present for the meeting. Her forearms moved in patterns that showed she was very interested in what Dr. Park had to say. Dr. Park, the commander said, we need to understand how human thinking differs from other galactic species. Jake's approach to problem-solving appears to be fundamentally different from anything we have seen before. Dr. Park activated a small holographic display device. Images of Earth appeared in the air above her hand. Humans evolved on a world that was both beautiful and dangerous, she began. Unlike many species that developed in stable environments, humans faced constant challenges. Climate changes, natural disasters, predators, diseases. The images showed early humans living in small groups, moving across vast landscapes. Most intelligent species in the galaxy evolved by becoming specialists, Dr. Park continued. The crystalline beings like Veltar developed incredible computational abilities. The gaseous species like Huthin learned to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. Each species found one optimal way to solve problems. But humans are different. Commander Zwaxthra asked. Humans are generalists, Dr. Park replied. We survived by being adaptable. When one approach did not work, we tried another. When environments changed, we changed with them. She showed images of human history. Farmers becoming soldiers. Soldiers becoming teachers. Teachers becoming explorers. This made humans excellent at something that no other galactic species does well, Dr. Park said. We are good at changing our perspective when our current perspective is not working. Jake listened carefully. He had never thought about his own thinking process before. Dr. Park, he said, why did no one else see the peaceful solution to the Gordian maze? It seems obvious now. Because they were all looking at the problem from the perspective of their own species, she replied. Crystalline beings see problems as mathematical equations to be solved. Gaseous beings see problems as information processing challenges. Military species see problems as conflicts to be won. Dr. Park changed the display to show brain scans of different species. Humans see problems as puzzles that might have hidden pieces, she said. You asked a question that no one else thought to ask. What if the problem is not what it appears to be? Commander ZYX-Thra's yellow eyes grew brighter. This has implications for many other challenges facing the galactic community. Dr. Park nodded. I have been studying reports from various sectors. There are trade disputes that have lasted for decades, territorial conflicts that seem unsolvable, resource shortages that have caused suffering on multiple worlds. And you think human perspective could help with these problems? The commander asked. I think human perspective could help with some of these problems, Dr. Park corrected. Humans are not smarter than other species. We just think differently. Jake raised his hand. What does this mean for me? Am I supposed to solve problems for the whole galaxy now? Dr. Park laughed.
No, Jake.
But your success has shown the galactic community that human thinking has value. There are now requests for human advisors from dozens of worlds. She showed him messages on her display device. The crystalline hegemony wants human consultants to help with their ongoing border disputes. The gaseous collective wants to study human negotiation techniques. Even the mysterious Void Collective has sent a request for human cultural exchange. Commander ZYX-Thra's arms moved in the pattern that meant she was making an important decision. Jake Martinez, she said formally, the Galactic Defense Academy hereby offers you a position as Special Advisor for Alternative Strategic Thinking. Jake blinked in confusion. What does that mean? It means you would help us redesign our curriculum to include human-style problem-solving approaches, the commander explained. You would also consult on real galactic conflicts that traditional methods have failed to resolve. Dr. Park added, and it means you would be the first human to hold a teaching position at the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy. Jake felt overwhelmed. A few weeks ago, he had been struggling to understand basic dimensional warfare theory. Now, they wanted him to teach others. I am still learning, he said. How can I teach when I do not know everything yet? Jake, Dr. Park said gently, the best teachers are often people who remember what it was like to not understand something. You can help other students learn to ask the right questions instead of just finding the right answers. Commander ZYX-Thra brought up a display showing Jake's test results. Your solution to the Gordian maze has been sent to military academies throughout the galaxy. Students and teachers are studying your approach. Some academies are already changing their curricula, Dr. Park added. They are adding courses in what they are calling perspective shifting and alternative problem analysis. Jake looked at the images of his simple solution displayed on the screen. 3 circles representing 3 factions. A few basic questions about what each faction really needed. A simple plan for cooperation instead of conflict. This all started because I drew pictures in a notebook, he said. Sometimes the most important breakthroughs come from the simplest approaches, Dr. Park replied. That is what makes human thinking valuable to the galactic community. Commander ZYX-Thra stood up, all 4 of her arms moving in a formal pattern. Jake Martinez, do you accept the position of Special Advisor for Alternative Strategic Thinking? Jake thought about his grandfather, the farmer who had become a soldier and then returned to farming. His grandfather had always said that the best way to help people was to understand what they really needed, not what they said they wanted. I accept, Jake said. 6 months after solving the Gordian maze, Jake found himself sitting in a conference room aboard the galactic peacekeeping vessel Unity. The room was filled with representatives from 12 different worlds, all facing their own versions of impossible problems. The Unity was unlike any ship Jake had ever seen. Instead of weapons, it carried advanced communication equipment, cultural exchange facilities, and negotiation centers. It had been built specifically for peaceful conflict resolution, inspired partly by the success of Jake's approach to the Gordian maze. Captain Sarah Wilson, a human from Earth's diplomatic corps, commanded the Unity. She was a middle-aged woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had volunteered to work with the new Galactic Peace Corps. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various classifications, Captain Wilson announced, we are here to address the Kepler mining dispute, which has been ongoing for 18 months. Jake looked around the table at the delegates. The Ferris Corporation was represented by beings that looked like living metal sculptures. The Independent Miners Union was represented by small, furry creatures with large eyes. Between them sat officials from the Galactic Trade Commission, who resembled tall, thin trees with golden bark. The situation is simple, Captain Wilson continued. The Ferris Corporation claims exclusive mining rights to the asteroid belt around Kepler 452. The Independent Miners Union says these asteroids have been their traditional territory for generations. Both sides have filed legal claims. Both sides have threatened military action. Jake had studied the files during the journey to Kepler 452. On the surface, it looked like a straightforward territorial dispute. Two groups wanted the same resources, and both had reasonable claims to ownership. But Jake had learned to look deeper than surface appearances. Marcus Webb, the lead negotiator for Ferris Corporation, spoke first. He was a heavy-set human with a deep voice and expensive clothes. "The law is clear," Webb said. Ferris Corporation filed proper territorial claims with the Galactic Registry 5 years ago. We followed all procedures. We paid all fees. These asteroids legally belong to us. The lead representative of the Independent Miners Union made chirping sounds that were translated by a computer voice. Squeaker claims these asteroids have been mined by our families for over 200 years. Legal papers do not change traditional rights. Webb shook his head. Traditional rights have no legal standing under galactic law. These creatures never filed proper claims. They never paid registry fees. They have no documentation of their activities. More chirping from the miners. Squeaker says our people do not understand galactic legal systems. We mine asteroids to survive, not to make profits for corporations. Jake listened to the arguments for an hour. Both sides presented evidence, made legal claims, and accused each other of acting in bad faith. The Trade Commission officials suggested various compromise solutions, but neither side would accept them. During a break, Jake approached Captain Wilson privately. "Captain," he said, "I think we are asking the wrong questions." "What do you mean?" Jake pulled out his notebook. He still preferred paper and pen for initial thinking. Everyone is arguing about who owns the asteroids. But what if ownership is not the real issue? Captain Wilson looked at his notes. Jake had drawn simple diagrams showing the asteroid belt, the corporate mining ships, and the small family vessels used by the independent miners. The Ferris Corporation has huge ships that can strip mine entire asteroids in days, Jake explained. The independent miners use small tools to extract specific minerals without destroying the asteroids. So, they are using different mining methods, Captain Wilson said. How does that help? Jake pointed to another part of his diagram. The corporate ships are designed for quantity. They want to extract as much material as possible as quickly as possible. The family miners are designed for quality. They want to find rare minerals that can support their families for years. Captain Wilson studied the diagram more carefully. Are you saying they are not really competing for the same things? I think they could be helping each other instead of fighting each other, Jake replied. When the negotiations resumed, Jake asked for permission to speak. Mr. Webb, he said, what type of materials is Ferris Corporation most interested in? Webb looked confused by the question. Common industrial minerals, obviously. Iron, nickel, basic alloys. We need large quantities for our manufacturing operations. Jake turned to the independent miners representative. Squeaker, what materials do your families traditionally search for? The translator chirped. Squeaker says rare crystals, precious metals, exotic compounds. Things that are valuable but exist in small quantities. Jake looked around the table. So, Ferris Corporation wants common materials in large quantities. The independent miners want rare materials in small quantities. That is correct, Webb said, but I do not see how that matters. We still need access to the entire asteroid belt to make our operations profitable. Jake opened his notebook again. What if you could get access to the entire asteroid belt, but in a way that also helped the independent miners? He drew a new diagram showing both types of ships working in the same area. The independent miners have been working these asteroids for 200 years, Jake explained. They know exactly where the rare materials are located. The corporate ships could mine the common materials while the family miners extract the rare materials from the same asteroids. Webb frowned. That would slow down our operations significantly. But it would also reduce your costs, Jake replied. The independent miners could guide your ships to the asteroids with the highest concentrations of common materials. You would not waste time mining asteroids that are mostly rock. The translator chirped excitedly. Squeaker says this could work. Our people know which asteroids have good iron deposits and which have good crystal deposits. Jake continued his explanation. The independent miners get to continue their traditional way of life. The Ferris Corporation gets more efficient mining operations and access to rare materials they could sell for premium prices. Trade Commission official Grovon rustled his golden leaves thoughtfully. This would require cooperation between the parties rather than competition. Exactly, Jake said. Instead of fighting over who owns the asteroids, both groups could benefit from sharing the asteroids. Webb and Squeaker looked at each other across the table. For the first time in 18 months of negotiations, neither seemed ready to argue. What would be the specific terms of such an arrangement? Webb asked slowly. Jake smiled. He was beginning to understand that most conflicts were not really about what people said they were about. They were about people not understanding what they actually needed from each other. That is what we are here to figure out, he said. 2 years had passed since Jake Martinez first walked into the Galactic Defense Academy. Now he stood in the same classroom where he had solved the Gordian maze, but everything was different. The room was filled with students from 15 different species, and Jake was the teacher. Welcome to Alternative Strategic Thinking, Jake announced to his new class. I know that sounds like a complicated name for a course, but the ideas we will explore are actually quite simple. His students looked much like he had when he first arrived at the academy. There was Zixera, a young crystalline being whose blue body glowed with nervous energy. Floden was a gaseous student whose container hummed with anticipation. Trisha was a plant-like being whose leaves rustled when she was curious. But this class was different from the one Jake had attended. These students had all volunteered to learn human-style problem-solving. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about the human approach to conflicts, and many young beings wanted to understand how it worked. Before we begin, Jake said, I want to tell you about the first test I ever took at this academy. He activated the display screen and showed them the Gordian maze simulation. The 3 fleets appeared, moving toward their inevitable battle. This test was designed to be impossible, Jake explained. Students were supposed to struggle with it for days or weeks. The best minds in the galaxy had worked on this problem for decades. Zixera raised a crystal arm. Professor Martinez, we have heard that you solved this test in minutes. How is that possible? Jake smiled. I asked a different question than everyone else was asking. He walked to the whiteboard, a simple human invention that had become popular throughout the academy. With a basic marker, he drew 3 circles representing the 3 factions. Everyone else was asking, how can we help one side win this war?
Jake said.
I asked, why does this war need to happen at all? Floten's container began to glow brighter. But surely military conflicts have obvious causes. Resources, territory, ideology. That is what most people assume, Jake replied. But often the real cause of a conflict is different from the obvious cause. He told them about the Kepler mining dispute, which had been resolved 6 months earlier. The Ferris Corporation and Independent Miners Union now worked together, sharing the asteroid belt in a way that benefited both groups. The obvious cause was a territorial dispute, Jake explained. Both groups wanted the same asteroids. But the real issue was that neither group understood what the other group actually needed. Trisha rustled her leaves. So the solution was cooperation instead of competition? Sometimes, Jake said. But not always. Each conflict is different. The important thing is to understand what is really happening instead of what appears to be happening. Jake walked back to the whiteboard and wrote a simple phrase, question everything. This is the most important lesson I can teach you, he said. When someone tells you that a conflict is about territory, ask if it might really be about resources. When someone tells you a conflict is about resources, ask if it might really be about fear. A student named Buzzik, who looked like a large insect, clicked his mandibles. Professor Martinez, this approach seems too simple. Surely galactic conflicts require sophisticated analysis. Jake had heard this objection many times over the past 2 years. Sophisticated analysis is valuable, he agreed. But sophisticated analysis of the wrong problem will not help you find the right solution. He brought up a new case study on the screen. 3 months ago, I was called to mediate a dispute between the Atmospheric Processors Guild and the Terraforming Consortium. They had been fighting for 5 years over contracts to modify planetary environments. The display showed 2 different approaches to changing planet atmospheres. One was fast but expensive. The other was slow but cheap. The guild accused the consortium of using dangerous shortcuts. Jake continued. The consortium accused the guild of being too slow and expensive. Both sides had filed lawsuits. Both had threatened to stop all terraforming work. Zixera asked, what was the real cause of their conflict? Fear, Jake replied. The guild was afraid that fast terraforming would damage ecosystems. The consortium was afraid that slow terraforming would leave people homeless for too long. He showed them his solution. Instead of competing with each other, we created a 2-phase process. The consortium does rapid basic terraforming to make planets livable quickly. Then the guild does detailed environmental work to make the planets beautiful and sustainable. Floden made humming sounds that indicated approval. Both groups got what they really needed. Exactly, Jake said. The guild got environmental protection. The consortium got to help people quickly. The real conflict was never about business competition. It was about different values and different timelines. Jake spent the rest of the class teaching his students basic techniques for reframing problems. He showed them how to look for hidden assumptions, how to identify underlying needs, and how to ask questions that revealed new possibilities. As the students were leaving, Zixera approached Jake's desk. Professor Martinez, she said, I have a question about your methods. What is it? You teach us to look for simple solutions to complex problems. But what if some problems really are as complex as they appear? What if simple solutions are not always possible? Jake had wrestled with this question himself many times. You are right, Zixera. Some problems really are very complex. Simple solutions do not work for everything. He sat down at his desk and pulled out his old paper notebook, the same one he had used to solve the Gordian maze. But I have learned something important over the past 2 years, he said. Most problems are not as complex as they first appear. People make them complex because they're looking at them from only one perspective. Jake opened his notebook to a page filled with simple drawings and basic notes. Human thinking is not better than other forms of thinking. It is just different. We are good at changing perspectives quickly. Other species are better at deep analysis or rapid calculation or long-term planning. So the value of human methods is not that they always work, Zixera said, but that they offer a different way of looking at problems. Yes, Jake replied. And sometimes a different perspective is exactly what is needed. After Zixera left, Jake sat alone in the classroom. Through the window, he could see ships from dozens of different worlds docked at Kepler Station. Each ship carried beings with their own ways of thinking, their own approaches to problems, their own ideas about how the galaxy should work. Jake's communication device chimed with a new message. It was from the Galactic Peace Corps headquarters. Professor Martinez, the message read, we have received a request for human consultation on a developing crisis in the Andromeda sector. 3 civilizations are preparing for war over access to a newly discovered wormhole. Traditional diplomatic approaches have failed.
Can you assist?
Jake smiled and began typing his reply. I will be happy to help. But first, let me ask, are we sure this conflict is really about the wormhole? He closed his notebook and gathered his simple teaching materials. Somewhere in the Andromeda sector, beings were preparing to fight over something they thought they understood. But Jake had learned that understanding the surface of a problem was rarely enough. The real work always began with asking better questions. As he left the classroom, Jake thought about his grandfather, the farmer who had become a soldier and then returned to farming. His grandfather had been right about simple solutions to complex problems. But Jake had learned something more. Sometimes the most complex problems had solutions so simple that only someone willing to question everything could see them. The galaxy was full of conflicts that seemed impossible to resolve. But Jake had discovered that impossible conflicts often became possible solutions once you understood what was really happening underneath the surface. And that was a lesson worth teaching to anyone willing to learn.